welcome everyone. We are the Sense Network, so I hope you are in the right place. And the webinar that we organized today for you is called The Future is Consumer-Centric, Understanding Cultural Trends and Why They Matter. So when it comes to the proper presentation, of course, Alex, which is our head of innovation, will take the lead. As a network, we are open to everyone, free access, so you can log in. We have every week we have some online event, hopefully in the future in person. But what we like to do is like welcome. We are big on cognitive diversity, creative intelligence. You can find a free course in the network for that. And if you know people that like to define themselves as either misfits, rebel, outliers, like to see things from different perspectives, to invite them in the network. We're always welcoming new perspective in here. And so we're confident that with your help, we can grow in diversity and be even like more creative and able to see the words in all these multifaceted wonders. So thank you for being here. This session is recorded, so just be wary of that in case you intervene and you say something during the seminar. And of course, it's going to be shared in our network on Friday. So if you want to share it with friends that couldn't make it there, you'll be able to. Thank you so much. And Alex, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Joya. All right, let me share my screen. Can everyone see this? Big hello. Yeah, nods. Okay, great. As I said, I would love this session to be as valuable and helpful as possible for everyone who dialed in and is listening in. I assume that, you know, amongst yourselves in this group, we might have practitioners, we might have people who are just curious about the topic. We have students in the mix, so you might be working on, you know, a paper where something like this could be useful. So regardless from, you know, what has driven you and motivated you to come here and join us, I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts and perspectives throughout the presentation. Obviously, ask if you need or want any clarification. So it kind of says it in the title already. This whole session today is all about consumer centricity and why it's important. So let's put it this way, it's less a webinar about, okay, what are the big trends out there? So this is not a trend piece, but it's more about, okay, why do these even matter? Why should we be paying attention? Why should we be listening? Why should we be thinking about them? Especially when we work in product or design or communications or marketing, anything related to, you know, dealing with people. As you guess, I gathered from the title, if there's one thing that I want you to walk away with, then just how valuable and important consumer centricity is. So we'll go through this now. But I think like a nice opening is always like this question here. There are brands out there, campaigns, products, communications, whatever it might be, whatever you might be in contact with, and you have this instinctive gut reaction to something that you see, and either it feels right or it feels wrong. And there's a reason why that is the case. So as I go through the next two slides, I would encourage you to think about this question. If you have any examples where you think, okay, that brand really got it wrong, or that brand really got it right, I'd encourage you to just put it in the chat. By the way, I can't see the chat, so if something goes in there, please let me know, Joya. But the reason why this is, in my mind, is because the people who have developed that product or who sat down together to think about that campaign, the designers, the strategists, the brand teams, the innovators, whoever worked on this, in my mind, understood the value of listening to people and culture. There was someone or many who have observed and listened, paid attention, maybe collaborated with someone to really understand what's going out there, what's happening, and how can we create something that will truly resonate with the people that we're trying to reach. So just to give you three examples, and there are many, many more out there, but these just exemplify the point in my mind. Is so last year, I believe it was last year, Apple launched an ad campaign centered around privacy. You see the picture on the left-hand side, and you look at that ad, or I looked at that ad, and I was like, okay, wow, I don't believe that Apple would have ever 5 years ago spent even $1 on an ad, like an ad dollar, on talking about privacy. And you begin to understand, okay, why is this happening? Why is this going on? Why in 2021 is one of the biggest tech companies bringing out an ad about privacy and pouring all of their ad spend into this topic? So you begin to ask yourself why that is happening, what is driving that, and why that seems to be relevant to people out there. And so if you follow that train of thought and you begin to think about the bigger socio-political shifts in society and what is happening in culture at large, it suddenly makes sense why they might be talking about these things, why privacy, after all of the scandals, all of the leaks, topics around transparency, topics about protection and self-protection are suddenly becoming more important in people's lives, and why something like that may be relevant or not to people out there. The second example in the middle, which is, I believe, a more recent one, Yves Saint Laurent Beauty just signed with Lil Nas X as their new beauty ambassador, which personally I think is an absolutely brilliant move. But it's not just about, oh, great, they signed this person and that person is really famous and that person does great music. But it's the very specific decision that was made within the context of how beauty is actually evolving and changing. If you start thinking about how beauty ideals, beauty norms, beauty stereotypes are changing, how people's attitudes towards what is beautiful or not beautiful are shifting, how that spectrum is evolving and developing, and how diversity, inclusion, and equity are more and more important amongst beauty consumers, you suddenly get to a point where you're like, okay, I understand why they might have made that decision. And personally, I think it was a very smart move. And then on the right-hand side is a company that is called Boosh. It's quite a successful kombucha company. Now, with kombucha, not only are they tapping into this whole trend around wellness, holistic well-being, and so on, but interestingly, at least for me personally, I look at that picture and I go, why is that kombucha in a bottle that looks like a wine bottle? And they've called it an orange wine, but it has nothing to do with wine. It might have, because it's kombucha, because it's brewed in that way, it has 0 alcohol, but it might have the fizziness of an orange wine, and it might have the taste, flavor profiles of something that you could associate loosely with a wine. And I think that's really fascinating, because if you think about what has happened at a larger scale with alcohol, 0 alcohol, moderate drinking, 0 drinking, and so on, something like this suddenly makes sense. And you can really imagine how this bottle would be on a dining table, and you would have the same rituals and the same gestures and the same experience that you would have around the table with the wine, only that it's not the wine. And so that brand, in using a bottle like that, is really tapping into that trend. Similarly, I could have also put here Heineken's 000 beer. That was the main sponsorship of last year's Euros. When, similarly to the Apple ad, I was thinking, I've never seen, not really, at least at that scale, a beer company use their ad money to promote a 0% beer at a tournament like that. That's crazy to me, but it speaks to what is happening in culture. So these are just 3 examples in my mind that quite nicely bring to life why consumer centricity, or understanding what is happening in culture at large, is so important when brands and brand teams and innovator and product designers make decisions. Any questions at this stage? Any disagreements, agreements, other examples? No? Silence? Okay, great. Good. Moving on. My point made, the future is consumer-centric. So this was just our little intro to the rest of the deck. But the 4 points that I would like to cover now are these 4. So number 1, Sense Worldwide, which is some people on this call are part of Sense Worldwide, and Sense Worldwide and the Sense Network are connected and are one. So I'll speak to that in a moment. The second piece is trends, drivers, and insights. So yes, we're talking about cultural trends, but I would never really look at them in isolation. There's something called drivers. So where did they come from? There's a reason for that. And then insights. What do you do with that understanding? So we'll talk about that briefly. We then talk about the so what. Why does all of this even matter? I feel like by the time we get to that chapter, we probably have all understood why it's important, but repetition doesn't do harm. And then the final part, the now what. So just a few principles as you shift towards a more consumer-centric mindset or way of working, some core principles and examples. All right. So let's talk about Sense Worldwide briefly. I don't want to spend too much time talking about us, the 3-4 people on this call. If you are part of the Sense network, you would have probably come across the word or the term Sense Worldwide before. If not, I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about us. The reason why I guess we talk about consumer centricity and the importance of it is because we have this mantra as a team. If you're not creating with your consumers, you're not creating for them. Now, I look at this sentence and it makes absolute sense for me. And I always have this bias in me where I'm like, well, but this is obvious. Shouldn't everyone be acting like this? Shouldn't every brand be behaving like this? And the more surprised I am in every client conversation that we have, that many design teams and many innovation teams and many insights teams don't actually do this. And for me, thinking about these things, I'm like, but how are you able to create a meaningful product or a meaningful campaign or experience if you haven't spoken to a single person who it's for, if you haven't engaged at all with the people who it's meant for? Anyway, so this is what we're all about, our mantra is. But in a nutshell, and I'm also going to invite Joya into at this stage if she does want to add something, but Sense Worldwide exists for over 20 years. And Sense Worldwide, this is what we do in a nutshell. We do innovation strategy. Now, there's a very specific way we do this. We do this by collaborating with people who are creative outliers, who are leading edge, who are early adopters. So if you are part of the Sense network, you would have probably, or will very soon, get an email from us that says, project announcement. We are exploring the future of plant-based nutrition or luxury or whatever it may be. So reaching out to the thousands of people that we have in the network allows us to collaborate with people who have a passion or an interest or a perspective on a topic that we try to better understand. So as we go through this collaborative process with people in the Sense network, we develop a better understanding of their attitudes and values and mindsets and preferences and how all of this manifests in decision making. And we collaborate on the next generation of plant-based products or the next generation of luxury beauty products or whatever it may be. But through the process of collaboration, we build up a lot of confidence that what we're doing will actually make a difference in people's lives because we're doing it together with them. This has proven quite successful, and we've done it for a lot of companies, and I've listed some of them down here. We've worked with Nike on the future of retail, and you'll see that on another slide. We've worked with Samsung, with Adidas, Sonos, the likes of Estee Lauder and Chanel. Now, one thing that is probably also important to note or understand is you can look at the cultural shifts that are happening in mainstream culture, and depending on the positioning of your business or where you're operating, you can go, okay, what is happening right now? What are the big, large shifts that are influencing and impacting culture or consumer culture at large right now? You can either do that through observation, through primary research, through secondary research. You can buy research reports from trend agencies. The difference between that and what we do is, because we work with people at the very forefront of an industry or a market, or people who you might consider leading edge or cutting edge, or people highly passionate about a topic, so much so that they have a strong understanding and interest of what is happening in that space. Working with people like yourselves on these projects means that we're working at the edges of culture, not in the middle of culture, not in the mainstream, but some things that are slightly more removed, that are not necessarily yet considered mainstream culture. What that means is that we're picking up on signals that are important to certain people and that might be relevant to more people, i.e. the mainstream, in the future. So the signals that we're picking up are indicators of what will happen tomorrow. So the briefs that we work on, or the projects that we work on, would not necessarily be what are the trends in luxury today, but rather what is the future of luxury. And that it's a nuance, but that's the difference between just working with existing cultural trends or being part of identifying those that will emerge and grow over time and over the next few years. And this is why working with the Sense Network, working with you guys, is just so valuable. So because of this, we've created the Sense Network. You know, Joya is heading up the Sense Network. Freddie is a consultant. He's also on this call. I'm also part of the Sense Worldwide team, and we work together hand in hand to collaborate with the network. Now, working on projects is not the only thing that we do in the network and with the network. It's just one of the things that we do. So if you've explored the network, you would have seen that there are many more things and offerings, but this is just one of the elements. So over the years, we've built quite a diverse network all around the world. So we have thousands of members at this point. And so the exciting thing is that you put out a brief, whether it's luxury or nutrition or something else, and people from all corners, you never know where, will put up their hand and say, I have a story to tell. I have a perspective on this. I want to share something. I want to be part of this. So over the years, we've worked on briefs such as, what's the future of perfume? Where's the perfume industry going? What does perfume even mean to people? We have worked on the future of retail with Nike. So the result of that was the new House of Innovation. And so we looked at retail and in-store experiences to set a new global benchmark for what that means. We worked with Samsung on the future of gaming. Why do people game? What do they game? How do they game? Like what happens next? What is the future of luxury beauty? We've worked on similar briefs with both Chanel and Estee Lauder to look at how are beauty standards, how is beauty at large, how is it changing? What does it mean to people? What does being beautiful feel like? And this was more around the future of, let's say, social selling. So we worked with Depop, the social marketplace, to understand why people were even using the app. They had a successful product. Many, many people were using it, but they had no appreciation why people were using it and who was using it for what reasons. So this to give you an overview of what Sense Worldwide does in collaboration with the Sense Network. I'm just going to pause again. Any questions?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Alex. And I also put in the chat a link to join the Sense Network in case you aren't part of it already. Also, as Alex was referring to collaboration, I just want to stress this brand collaboration that we have, for which we find people in the network, are paid. So if you are selected, we definitely value your time and your input. But again, in the network, you will find many other interesting things like article and session that we recorded. So feel free to explore. And if you have any question, of course, DM me and I will help you. So we have a couple of questions, but also in the beginning, you were asking people in the call to say whether they had other brand in mind when it comes to actually being able to capture cultural trends. And Satadru, that we know very well because he's one of our aficionados, mentioned Cadbury's dairy milk chocolate in India. So I don't know, Satadru, if you want to expand on that, if you have anything in mind when it comes to how they were able to capture some cultural trends.
Thank you for noticing that. Cadbury as a brand, I think everybody knows about that particular brand. However, if I remember this particular use case, and I think Cadbury actually entered India around 1950s, but they never really kind of took off at that point of time. Even with their offering around milk chocolates, it didn't work. Now, if anyone of you, if you have ever visited India, you guys may know that India is a land of sweets, right? We do have different kind of sweet shops around here. So I think there is a big nostalgia and love for sweets over here. Different states have different kinds of sweets. So I believe there was a study done which where it was mentioned that it was very difficult to break that stigma of thought between the Indians at that point of time. But over the years, I think Cadbury came up with a particular advertisement in 1994, 1995, where they introduced dairy milk as a chocolate, right, over here in India. And they kind of started to play with the Indian mindset of how they can equalize dairy milk chocolate to a sweet, so the jingle that they used, or the advertisement, or the visuals that they created, I think that kind of played in the minds of the Indians. And they used phrases like asli swad zindagi ke, so something like, which means like the real taste or the essence of life. And also, they kind of created a heavy impact on using the word meetha, which literally translates to the use sweet, and they associated the same with dairy milk. So the usage of these terminologies and playing it again and again through advertisements and jingles, I think that really set the tone. And today, even during the biggest of the festivals, when we go to the shop, probably we ask for a dairy milk and not a sweet. Like, there are gift chocolates and everything. So sweet is equal to dairy milk nowadays in India. So I'm saying, like, it has evolved so much over the years. I think they have really broken into the market. And we are not even talking about the brand Cadbury. We are just straight away asking for dairy milk.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Satadru, for this share.
Yeah.
And Alex, I don't know if you want to comment on this. I also have a couple of questions in the chat, and then I see that we have another person in the call, George, that raised his hand. So George, if you want to also ask your question, and then I will read the one that are in the chat.
Thank you very much. I have a question regarding finding ideas that take into account cultural nuances, because whether we believe in globalization or deglobalization, the fact is the world is becoming increasingly interconnected, and cultures are now mixing amongst themselves for different regions across the world. They're becoming a melting pot in a sense. Now, how do we ensure that the ideas that we generate are ideas that take these cultural nuances into account? Is it having a diverse team, for instance, or is there a process behind it?
Great question. So number one, I think, and it's somewhat relates to what Satadru was talking about, because there are cultural shifts in contemporary consumer culture that you would observe globally, and you can react accordingly. What Satadru was talking about were very specific, market-specific cultural nuances that were essential for a brand like that to break into the market or have relevance in the market. And I think it doesn't always come down to it, but I think a globalized or a local strategy or approach is often tied to the strategic philosophy, if you like, of the brand that, you know, is trying to push their product or experiences or whatever into the market. So if you have a player like Adidas, then they have a global strategy, and only in very, very select markets or countries they would have adaptations. But given the global footprint of the brand, where they have localized is they have localized their Adidas original stores to blend in more heavily with the local environment of the city they were in as part of their strategy. But technically speaking, they have a global approach. But they can, you know, they can afford or allow themselves to do that because they have relevance across borders. I think one approach or one solution to your point could be that you have a very diverse team that brings in local knowledge, local understanding, or certain experiences from the past and perspectives that will be valuable in understanding whether something will work in a certain market or not. But you can also co-create and validate with consumers in those specific markets. So if you have a pipeline of products or a way that these are being expressed or messaged or communicated, you can run market-specific validation studies, so to speak, to make sure that the way that these are positioned at a strategic level or a tactical level, that they resonate with that specific audience in that specific cultural context or market. Does that answer your question? Does it help?
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alex. And we have another couple of questions. I will fuse them because Michael and Mariam were actually addressing the same doubt. So Michael say, does it ever happen that some trends are predicted, a company gets behind it, and then the trend quickly goes away and never really materialize? And Mariam was also thinking about predictions. How accurate can that be? And how do brands differentiate between trends and fads?
Good question. I mean, the easy answer is a company will always place bets, and some work and some don't. But the section of the presentation that we're about to go through, which talks not just about trends but also drivers and insights, is a way, I would say, to make sure that you're not just tapping into a fad but actually a sustainable trend, because a fad appears out of nowhere without real reason or without real substance, if you like. But a cultural trend is not random. There's a reason why it's there, and it is very likely to stay. So if you think about large scale trends like, you know, this idea of people buy into experience over things or objects, it's been slow and steady growth and has reached like peak now. Now, I don't know if it will stay that way or if it will go down again, but that has been developing over many years, that people suddenly begin to value experience over buying more things. So a shift away from materialism. If you think about trends on that level, like a shift away from materialism to experiences, that's not just a fad. But if you're talking about some crazy flavor on TikTok, It can be a tactical decision as a brand to jump on the bandwagon, quickly produce a cookie with that flavor, knowing that it will be gone in a month. If a company's set up that way, very agile, and can experiment, that's fine. But I wouldn't bet all my money on that, crazy flavor that appeared on TikTok.
Thank you.
Except for pumpkin spice, right? Starbucks has made it a thing.
Yeah, they always come back. It's the season.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Any more questions, or should we move on, Joya?
We can definitely move on. Thanks. I'll keep an eye on the chat for new questions.
Okay, great. So trends, drivers, and insights. I mentioned earlier that trends are important, but I would never look at them in isolation. I feel like I've made this point already, but I think one of the really important things to understand, and maybe this is also the difference between what I call a cultural trend or a trendy something fad, is that cultural trends in my mind are larger shifts in contemporary consumer culture. So there are professions out there that are called trend hunters, and trend spotters, et cetera. Now, they also do something like this, but I think what we're working with is like larger evolutions and larger shifts that you're able to observe and experience, on a macro cultural level. So we're not talking about what happened on the catwalk last week. Are we seeing a lot of dots or not? Are we seeing a lot of purple or not? Because that is seasonal. So we're talking about larger trends that have a reason, that came from somewhere, have substance, that are very, very likely to stay. So just to reiterate that point, when we talk about trends in this context, we talk about how people's attitudes, values, behaviors, mindsets are shifting. It's a shift in how people suddenly think about something. It's a shift or a change in how people behave and act. It's a shift in what people prefer and how that manifests in the choices they make. So because these changes or shifts influence and impact very deep-rooted things like attitudes and behaviors and values, they're typically... That was not a question, I think. They're triggered on a macro level. So when you talk about, so let's call them behavioral shifts. So you can see shifts or trends in very specific sectors, in finance, for example, in nutrition, for example, in sports, or whatever that sector or industry might be. So an example here is clean eating. Yeah, so people are suddenly into clean foods and natural foods, et cetera, but it is within the industry or the context of nutrition and food. But then you also have sector agnostic shifts, like this one that has been around for many, many years now, similar to the experience one that I described earlier, is this idea of instant gratification. So people expect music, food, transportation, entertainment, online shopping, everything on demand. I want it now. I want it at the click of a button. Instant gratification. So something that stretches across a number of industries, experiences, and products. Now, what many brands have understood is that if they anchor themselves to these shifts, so the changes in behavior and attitudes, they can create more meaningful products, or products that more strongly resonate with people in culture right now, because there's a direct link between the product and tapping into what people find important right now and what they're looking for. So that is the what. You observe a cultural trend, you hear about a shift in consumer culture, you read about it or whatever, and it feels like, okay, that's something that I could work with. It's relevant to my brand, my product, my whatever. but that is just the what, it's not yet the why. Like, the most important question that you need to ask yourself, or should be asking yourself, if you work in this profession or in strategy or innovation or anything related to consumer centricity, is why? Why is it happening? Why am I hearing this? Why am I seeing it? What does it mean for us? And so I think this is where we come back to the question earlier around, you know, trends with substance that are here to stay versus fads. These larger shifts that we're talking about, like instant gratification, experience, clean eating, and so on, they don't just appear overnight. Like, that you can observe them grow steadily over time. And they emerge for a reason, because they're usually linked to how society is changing, the political, economic, technological. So if you're familiar with the pestle analysis, these are all your acronyms, right? That are somehow, those changes in those dimensions are pushing and driving a trend to where it is. Those are forces or drivers of change. So if you observe something, ask yourself why it's happening. What's going on here? And if you read further, and if you ask deeper, and if you ask more whys, you will see whether there are reasons, whether there are drivers and forces pushing it or not. And that, for me, makes the difference between a shift in culture versus a fad. So we spoke about two things now. We spoke about cultural trends. We spoke about drivers, so the ones that are pushing it into the mainstream, let's say. The third point is, okay, I've seen what's going on. I've understood why it's happening, but I could also say, okay, why should I care? Like, what is this telling me? How can I use this? Should I be using it? And this is where you get to cultural insights or consumer insights. So this is where you start to connect the dots. You've identified something happening in culture. You've seen certain behaviors appear. You've asked yourself why it's happening. You've tried to understand it. And the next question, the final one, is, okay, how do I apply this to my brand or my product? How is this useful to what I'm doing? How is it valuable? How is it helpful? This is really where you connect the dots and you develop a much deeper understanding of what people are asking for, what people want. Now, Satadru went through a project with us, so he will be familiar with this, but it's really that deeper extra layer of trying to understand what is going on. Why is it happening? And why is it important to us as a business or a product team or a strategy team or a marketing team? And it usually maps out and allows you to understand how certain people that you are trying to reach, that you are trying to address, who you're trying to build a relationship with, what they're asking for, what they're craving, what they desire, what they need to feel positive and well. So sometimes these are called consumer tensions or consumer frustrations. Sometimes they're called human truths. You'll come across a number of terms in that space. But this is really about going really, really, really deep. What does it mean? What is it telling me? How does it help me to look at the challenge or look at the brief from a different perspective? So I'm just going to briefly go through this example here that we worked on as a team, and that was just part of the project. Again, I look at that picture on the right and I go, I don't think that a beauty brand would have ever advertised their beauty product like that a few years ago. But what they're doing is, they're tapping into a new understanding and a new appreciation of what beauty means and all the signals that people use to understand, okay, natural, real, raw, good for me, healthy for me, good for my skin. So what we've been seeing is a huge wave or a huge trend towards this idea of realness. Now, this specific example is about beauty, but we're actually seeing a shift towards the real truth or realness or rawness across the board. Not in all industries, a few of them, and I'm quite curious to see whether it will affect other industries as well. But if you think about the whole holistic well-being trend, whether it is beauty or whether it's linked to nutrition or whether it's linked to exercise, this plays a role. If you think about hospitality and the types of retreats that people go on these days, again, they play with the idea of realness and rawness. You see it in product design, like they on purpose deliberately make the product imperfect, like they put a little like dent in the product or whatever, right? Or you suddenly, I've heard of an example where a company was producing, I think it was porcelain or clay crockery, and at the very end of the assemble line there was a person, and the person's job was to put their fingerprint in the product, right? This would have never happened, 5, 6, 7 years ago in product design. But this idea of a connection with the creator, it needs to be realer. It needs to be, the human touch needs to be felt and seen and expressed. Like all of this is influencing and impacting decisions that brands are making, even if it's just putting a fingerprint in a product. So this idea of realness, where is it coming from? So number one, there's a growing awareness and consciousness that being human means being imperfect. So people are beginning to embrace this idea of imperfection and being naturally beautiful. Now, what we've seen is that this whole shift has been accelerated. If it wasn't for the pandemic, I would assume it would have taken few more years. I think it would have come anyway, but it would have probably taken slightly longer. But the pandemic has really shifted people's attitude towards putting makeup on and what beauty means. So there was a real shift away from, oh, I leave the house every day and put makeup on, to I'm in the house and I can take care of my skin. So what we've then also seen is, if you flick through magazines or if you look at, I don't know, social media, suddenly very high paid photographers are no longer photoshopping and shooting in HD, but in low res. You suddenly see, the editorials are moving away from being glossy to being raw. You even had a phase where people were using hashtag no filter on social media. All of these are signals and signs that demonstrate that this is not just a fad, but there's something happening here. So the question then is, how do brands react to that? If you are a beauty brand, if you are a Chanel, if you are an Estee Lauder, and you need to brief your design teams to create new products, what do you tell them? If you brief your marketing teams to position these products, what do you tell them? How do they work with a trend like this, right? So I'm not going to go through all of the insights now, but this is just building out the drivers and the trend that we've seen, really helping the teams that we work with to understand what is going on, what people are looking for, what people suddenly appreciate about beauty products, and how beauty products need to be messaged and expressed and look like and feel like to resonate in this space. Now, you can probably go on a trend site and read a trend report, and some of them in this space might talk about something along similar lines. Or in our work, we've identified these trends by collaborating, as I said earlier, with people from the Sense Network. Now, these types of programs that we go, or collaborations that we go through, and some of you may know it, take weeks for us to go through. Like, we will engage for a few days, and then we as a team go back and have a look and try to understand what's going on. We engage again for maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. In this specific case, we ran an immersive sensory deep dive with about 20 people from the Sense Network to really understand what beauty feels like, looks like, smells like, and so on. So you guys took pictures for us of your whole collection. You helped us understand what is important, what is not important. It was a phenomenal project. And this is all about building empathy with what is important to people, like actual people. So you'll see quotes like this appear. I think the world being shut down just inspired a lot of us to go basic. If and when we do leave the house, with makeup on, it's very natural. It was a lot of unlearning of things about how to look natural and simply take care of your skin. Now, it's just one quote, but there's so much truth in that quote. And so you begin to ask yourself, why is that person saying this? What does it actually mean? Are more people saying this? We need to dig deeper and better understand what's going on here. So if you work with 20, 30 people from the network and you see these things emerge, you suddenly create a picture of what is happening in the industry, what is happening in culture, and so on. Or like, why would someone ever, create a product that looks like that? And it's successful. So it's, again, taps into this idea of rawness and realness. So this person here said the dynamic is reversing. So leaving an element of imperfection makes you part of the discovery. Okay, interesting. So now someone is talking about imperfection equals more discovery. So if you're a brand in that space, wanting to create an experience around discovery, suddenly you can play with product format and product form to create discovery journeys that are linked to not a polished, so this person says, nothing too polished, something polished feels synthetic. So again, okay, in the past, everything looked exactly the same, uniformity, polish, polish, polish. Every bag from Dior looked the same. People no longer want same. And part of the discovery is looking for those things that are unique to the bag or unique to the product. And it's part of the discovery experience. So this is how we work through these projects to understand what is going on and what people are looking for. And these might be signals right now, or like 2 years ago, they were signals, but we're beginning to see them more and more play out in consumer culture. All right.
Great. So before you move on to the next section, we have a couple of questions in the chat. So I think this might be a good moment to share them. So Paul was asking, would you see the rise in wellness, and this links to what you were saying previously, as a cultural trend? Any thoughts into where this is heading? And then Mariam wanted to know if you think that brands being transparent in regards to themselves and their operation has higher positive implications on their customers.
So the simple answer to the second question is yes. In my mind, it is, and we've actually seen quite a few brands play with this idea. I might even have it in the slides somewhere.
Okay.
No, maybe not. Maybe not. But it's like this idea of radical transparency. So you have a brand like Asket. They're from Stockholm, and they literally have every single cost listed in order to produce an item. So you can see what price they incur across the entire supply chain. They also have profiles of every supplier that they work with. You can click on the link, you zoom into, like on Google Maps, where exactly they're located, and so on and so on. So this idea of what is the next level of honesty, or what is the next level of trust that you can build between brand and consumers. And there are those that want to hide, and there are those that don't have to. Yeah. But I think there's definitely, I personally, I do think it has positive implications.
Yeah, somebody in the chat was also referring to Patagonia as an example of like a transparent supply chain. What about wellness? You mentioned that earlier. Is it a cultural trend, or is more like an area?
Wellness. I mean, and I'm usually not a huge fan of talking about demographics and generational differences, but if I talk to my parents, like the idea of wellness has never really been important in their lives. So I do think there is a shift that we're observing. Now, if you look at how people work these days, how many people suffer from burnout, the more awareness is being created about, positivity, and not just wellness, but mindfulness and well-being. I do think that is, you can probably call it like a massive macro trend, and wellness is part of that. I would say so, yes.
We also have a question from George. If you want to mute yourself. Yes.
Yes, I had a question regarding the fact that cultural trends could manifest in society in different ways. For instance, when you were explaining realness as a cultural trend, it reminded me of a podcast I was listening to on the intelligence, which went into the fashion trend when people are not trying to dress as celebrities anymore, but are trying to develop their own sense of fashion. And I feel like this is a manifestation of the realness cultural trend. But if there are multiple ways in which a cultural trend can manifest, how do we determine which ones are most likely to stick and which ones are most likely to dissipate, or whether there's some sort of complex mixture between them?
I don't think I have a perfect answer to that question. How to best identify which one will disappear? I mean, I guess it comes back to, you know, making educated guesses through the, you know, research that you do, the collaboration with your actual consumers to better understand what is going on in their lives and what is important to them, instead of basing decisions on assumptions that you might have about the world, and then constantly iterating around these and keeping an eye on them. And, you know, no one has a crystal ball, right? So there will always be decisions that were a good bet but didn't work out. Now, I'm not sure that's the answer that you wanted to hear, but I think that, so just to give you an example, a few years ago, we worked with the innovation team at Pepsi. And for Pepsi, we built a group of Sense Network members within the Sense Network. So a group of, I believe, 50 people who helped Pepsi continuously sense check everything that they did to make sure they wouldn't make any missteps until they stopped working with them, and then Kendall Jenner happened. But I'm not going to go into detail on the Pepsi ad now. But I think that is a way of doing it. If you in constant conversation and collaboration with actual people and actual consumers who are plugged into culture, who are voices in their communities, who are at the very forefront of whatever industry you might be working in. So having these pockets or networks of people who you can speak to and understand and listen what is happening and what is going on. That could be a continuous sense checking exercise if you want. Obviously, that can also be used to ideate and create new products, etc. But it's a way of sense checking.
Great. Thank you, Alex. I'm aware we are almost top of the hour, so there are no new questions. You can definitely move to the next section.
I feel like I need to speed up now if we want to wrap up
a little bit, but we are recording everything. So if anybody needs to leave before, everything will be recorded.
I think I'm going to go through this section fairly quickly because at this point, as I said earlier, I think it should probably be clear why I believe that cultural trends are important. But to put it in a nutshell, as a summary, as concise as possible, understanding cultural trends or shifts in contemporary culture that we've talked about means that you understand what really, really matters to people. Like at the end of the day, you're dealing with people, whether you're in an innovation team, a product design team, a marketing team. Consumer centricity is about understanding people. So if you as a brand want to create something that is meaningful, that is relevant, that really truly resonates with people, you really need to understand what is important to them. How does this person live their life? How do they assess what they like or dislike? What do they lean into? What do they lean out of? You really need to understand what is going on. Otherwise, how are you supposed to create something that is valuable to them? And all of the projects that we, for example, work on with the network, with you guys, is very much, we want to look at the world through your eyes. We want to walk through the world in your shoes. We want to see what you see. We want to feel what you feel. And we do that by, going through a number of exercises with you. We have different activities. We speak to you, we meet you. Pre-pandemic, we tended to meet you where you were and just spend time with you, empathize, right? And I mean, in my mind, innovation is the result of two things, and that is empathy meets creativity. That's my personal opinion, but that's how I think about innovation. Just a few other wider cultural shifts, I guess, that we're seeing. And I think we touched on this idea of localism earlier, but one thing that we're observing is this idea of localism in a hyper-globalized world. We had advances in technology over many, many years, if not 2 decades, that really pushed globalization. And now suddenly we're beginning to see the pendulum swing slightly in the different direction. And yes, we have all the tech and all the tools to live in a globalized world. But if you think about on a socio-political level, for example, what is happening with a contraction of cultures and societies and a move towards more nationalistic ideals, those are all playing into the idea of a growing sense of localism. Now, that is happening on a socio-political dimension, but you're also seeing that in terms of sustainability and supply chains, that people have a growing appreciation for where their food, their product, their item, their whatever comes from. And you want to reduce the transportation lines, or you want to support your neighborhood or your local community. So all of these elements are driving a stronger presence, let's say, for the idea of localism. The other one that we're seeing is this idea of opting out or the exploration of new systems. I think this has really picked up with alternative social media systems, but probably really with the metaverse and blockchain. That I think over the years, over the last, when did blockchain and crypto go mainstream? Maybe 1.5 years ago, something like that. There was a massive boom earlier this year. But that is an exploration for people into new systems. You opt out of the ones that are big, that you opt out of the ones that are known and seen where you are seen, and you explore systems where you're not necessarily seen. And on the one hand, the blockchain means full transparency. On the other hand, it means you can create a new identity. So the exploration of new systems. Then we spoke about this one already around realness, but this idea of people are ditching perfection. So we've seen it in beauty, but you also see it in people embracing playfulness and being fun and inventive. But this idea of there's a black and the white, one idea, perfection is slowly breaking down. And then one thing that we've been observing in luxury is, well, number one, luxury norms are being challenged. Like it's been happening for years now, but also this idea, and this is something that luxury brands are struggling with quite a bit, is the idea of inclusive exclusivity. Luxury has always played with exclusivity, but what happens when luxury consumers are demanding inclusive behaviors of exclusive brands? Not an easy one to tackle, but definitely one to be aware of and address as a brand in that space. Let's pause the questions right now. I'm just going to go all the way to the end. But I have 3 big principles, and principles in the sense that things to bear in mind and consider if you want to shift towards a more consumer-centric mindset. The first principle being obvious one. So to really foster and nurture a consumer-first mindset, you need to shift your thinking from product-driven to consumer-led. This seems really obvious now that I'm talking about it, especially now that you've been through this webinar for over 60 minutes by now. But interestingly, the more you talk to client teams and brand teams, the more you realize that they say they're consumer centric, but they're not actually consumer centric. Especially when you deal with companies and brands that have a history and a background in manufacturing, they usually struggle the most shifting their mindset to a consumer first one, because they will always start their line of argument with, we can produce this, so we should do it. They never start with, we heard that our consumers want this and we can do it. Again, it's a nuance, but it's a significant shift in how you operate as a business. It's almost a cultural shift that needs to happen to help a brand team shift away from manufacturing, product-led to being consumer-led. And that often comes with shifting your focus away from an inside-out perspective. We have conversations internally, we can do this, so let's push it into the market, to an outside-in perspective. What are we hearing? What are we seeing? What are people asking for? And then acting accordingly. So some of you, I don't know, who are on this call right now, might have worked with us on projects with Blue Diamond Growers. They're based in Sacramento. They are an almond cooperative, and they came from a manufacturing background. They never had consumer facing products. They were never present in supermarkets with, you know, their non-dairy milks and almond yogurts and almond products. A few years ago, they made the decision to shift their mindset away from manufacturing to consumer-centric. And it's been a very, very long journey that we've been on with them. But to really do this, we connected consumer with the actual teams. So we flew out to Sacramento and San Francisco, and we met the product teams and we met the R&D teams, and we went into the homes of their consumers. They sat down, they had a coffee together, they spent the day together. We went shopping with them. We went through their cupboards to really understand and help them empathize with their consumer and the people they're designing for. And then you can really see in their eyes how it makes click. It's like, right, this person in this home spoke about X, Y, and Z. I never thought that was relevant. I never knew this was important. I never saw this gap. And we can close that gap. We can create something for that frustration or for that need. Principle 2, approach challenges with beginner's eyes. So it's related to principle 1, slightly different, but good innovation doesn't happen behind closed doors. There's so many innovation teams, so many product teams who will sit together around a table and say, the world needs this product. But that mindset is based on assumptions that they have about the world around them. So these teams really need to be aware of their own biases and preconceptions. So one of the things that we always urge these teams is, when was the last time you looked at your own industry and your own category with fresh eyes, beginner's eyes, as if you're looking at it for the first time? Now, obviously, we can help them with this, but this is a good exercise to go through. So to give you an example, this was a project that we worked on with a financial services provider, and they wanted to understand what financial security meant and felt like. Now, they went into this project with the assumption and the understanding that financial security is a destination, an endpoint in a decades-long journey, something that people work towards, the end goal, financial security. And so what we did, we asked people in the Sense network to draw what financial security and security at large looks like. And if you look at these, everything's round. There's no destination. There's no endpoint on some agenda. There's no climbing the ladder to reach financial security. Financial security, in fact, is just one element in a multidimensional, holistic system of feeling secure. And the team looked at it and went, oh my God, we never thought about our industry in this way. And it completely shifted their mindset, because suddenly their products, their product portfolio, the way they positioned them, the images that they used on the website, the way they spoke about it was no longer through the lens of, well, it's a destination. And it completely shifted everything that they've done. And then finally, I'm going to begin with this quote. The most serious mistakes are not being made as a result of wrong answers. The true dangerous thing is asking the wrong question. So principle number 3 is ask a better question. Consumer centricity is about empathy and not demographics. If you're familiar with market research and consumer research of the past, so the way it was done, I don't know, 5 to 10 years ago, it was very much demographics led or driven. Are they these old, in that bracket, with that education, that income, and so on? And what can we learn from that? We're shifting away from that. Consumer centricity is really about understanding people's drivers and motivations. What is truly, truly driving them? What is truly motivating them? What is truly getting them excited? And depending on the hat that you're wearing, when you think about consumer centricity, you can make a massive difference with the question that you ask. So, and you can actually do that with something as random as cream cheese. We were working on a project around cream cheese. And if you want to better understand cream cheese from a consumer perspective, you could have simply asked, what do you like about cream cheese? What do you like about cream cheese? I like the tanginess that it has. I like the creaminess. I like flavors with chives and so on. But that is a very functional response to a product around cream cheese. But you can also apply creativity to the way that you ask questions. And so instead of asking this question, we asked, sell cream cheese to an alien. You know, imagine someone lands on this planet and has never seen, never tasted, never experienced cream cheese before. And you need to introduce this alien, this human being or whatever, to cream cheese in an effort to persuade them to try it. And suddenly, if you put yourself into that moment or situation, you go, cream cheese is the most wonderful thing on this planet. It feels like this in your mouth and on your tongue. It tastes like that. And you have a much richer response to not just what cream cheese tastes like, but what it feels like, the emotions associated with it, and so on. That's where you go much, much deeper on what consumer centricity and understanding people really means. So I know we're 10 minutes over, but just to wrap this up, to close it, in my mind, brand relevance can't be imposed. There was a time in the past where it was possible, but today it's earned. So if you think back to, I mean, not that I was born then, but the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, it was very easy for brands to just push a product into the market, onto people, and into culture. There were very few products out there anyway. There were only very few brands who had the funds to push products and market products in the market. But that has really changed. Like, the power dynamic between brands and consumers and people has completely shifted. So brand relevance, as I say here, can no longer be imposed. It needs to be earned by talking to people. So those brands or teams or strategists with, in my mind, the empathy, the openness, and the curiosity to have their eyes and ears closer to the ground will win with people. Like, brands and teams sit in ivory towers and have assumptions about the world. Like, step down, go on the street, talk to people. Like, what are they saying? What are they asking for? What are their needs? What are they want? So if you have the humbleness and the openness to meet them where they are, you'll win with them. Ooh, 12 minutes over. Thanks for staying.
Yeah, indeed. So one of the questions that I captured from the chat is they wanted to know if the slides would be shared at some point, Alex.
Is that not your decision? Joya?
Yes, but I want you to be cool with that. So we are going to add something in the post that we're going to publish on Friday, where you also see this recording. And so everybody's thanking you, and they're looking forward to the next Mind Expansion. We have one of these webinars every month. So this month, Alex took us through this journey, and next week we also have another networking event online. So feel free to be back. And of course, if you have other questions that will pop up in your mind in the next days, when we're going to publish this webinar, you can still comment and ask your question there, and even tag Alex, and he will come back and generously answer your question, because we know that sometimes things will come to you like after some reflection. So this is just the starting of a conversation. It's a team that is very dear to us, and so we're more than willing to have an engaged comment section under the recording of this webinar.